This is Professor Shea from the Cape Cod Community College Funeral Service Program. I've noticed lately that there's been a significant increase in the amount of students that have asked, how do I prepare for an exam? And in those emails or calls that I've received, and so have my colleagues, which is what prompts me to do this lesson, is that they've all said the same thing. I've studied the slides, but I don't know why I'm doing bad on the exam. And that's a little concerning. One question is, have you opened the book? Have you read the book? Yes, I read the book. But have you studied the book? Well, I read the book. So we need to differentiate between studying and reading. And we need to differentiate between attending lecture and studying, and what is the purpose of slides. So the purpose of slides during a lecture is to first keep the lecturer, your professor, on track. So that way they ensure that they covered everything that they promised you they would cover during that lecture. Two, it provides you a visual. So that visual may be simply words, no pictures, but the words give you topics that you know are now going to be covered. And for each one of those items, you now can follow along because your professor may or may not be going in order, but as they're going in order, you can follow and you know what topic there is. Now, slides are good for notes as well, and we may be able to take our notes directly on the slide. Now, in doing that, let's say we have this 2-column method, and I can draw a line. I can, maybe make a few notes over here, and then maybe over here I can make notes as well that say, for the 2-column method, I'm going to have on this side the textbook. Okay, I don't have to have all the words, but text, maybe you understand that. And the lecture. Now, for the 3-column method, I'm going to draw my 3 columns, right? So 1, 2, and 3. And then this is your text. This is my lecture. And this is post. Now, post is in, I'm going to, after the lecture, add any notes that maybe need to fill in the space. Now, as you can see with what I'm doing here, I'm using a touchpad that's in front of me. I don't write directly on my screen at this point, but I do have a touchpad on my desk in front of me. And you could do the same thing. A lot of us have tablets that have a touch screen. You can have a little stylus that allows you to write directly on them. And if you were able to take the slides, yes, there is a huge value to taking your notes directly on the slide because the professor's already taken a few bullet points for you, and they've made that easier so that you don't have to rewrite an area. So there is value to that. Now, on our next slide, you can see that there's images. Now, where's the value in the images? Yes, there's a value to studying off of slides, and there's a value to having slides for note-taking. I'm not going to discount that. So for having this, I can now write notes that point at something, and maybe a little arrow, and I can write a little note about that, or atelectasis or cardiomegaly. So maybe I'm going to write for cardiomegaly, I'm going to write in, if I can write, enlarged heart. Okay, and now I know that that's an enlarged heart. I know that there's a pneumothorax would be a collapsed lung. And that this is, that's my note taking. That's reminding me what a pneumothorax is. Now, pneumothorax goes a step further. And I'm going to use a medical abbreviation because it's shorter. So the C with a line above it means with, versus if I were to use a S with a line above it, that means without. So I'm going to say with air, right? Because we know, oops, that pneumo means air and thorax means lung. So I can write air, chest. And that's going to help me during my lecture to understand what these things mean. That's going to help me. And then I can write for pneumonia, I'm going to write bacterial or viral. And there's a couple different types of pneumonia. I could also have, now COVID pneumonia, something that most people did not hear about in previous years. So I have notes that help me in studying these images that I'm looking at. Now, the thing with note taking is that you do need to prepare for this and you do need to study. So you can't just read the book. That some of you may read the book and maybe you understand it, but did you really study it? Did you really look at the material? Did you commit it to memory? But more importantly, do you understand what you're reading? You may read it and you got the text, but do you know how to apply it? Do you know where this information can be used? And if you're asked on an exam, and you may have a professor that's fairly straightforward and gives you things that are fairly textbook based or maybe simply lecture based, and maybe you can follow along. Maybe you have a professor that covers a little bit of both. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to apply this. And that's where I get concerned. So there's two ways to take notes. I'm going to use a slide to mimic a piece of paper. But what you can do on electronically, as we're in our digital age that we're in, you can use PowerPoint, you can use Word, or you can use a paper notebook. So any of those work. Now I'm going to switch to the slide. Now I do want to show you a feature on the PowerPoint that will make it a little bit easier for you to take notes, okay, depending on how you want this. So now I'm going to go to my view, and I can change things. So I can do like a slide master. So let's say you want to, if I open the slide master, I now have control over everything on the left. I can change what all these different templates are, and I could create a template. So that way, when I go back and forth and when I'm adding slides, so if I click new slide, this is going to give me everything that I can have. And by pre-creating a template, I can have things where I want them. I can have columns that I've pre-labeled, and maybe I have something where I want to have the 3 columns already designed. Maybe I want something where I have the a title. Maybe I have certain times that in a certain class, it's best that we're going over, debits and credits, let's say, in accounting, and maybe we're doing a lot of math based off of that. So I need something that pre-labeled to have the various columns that I need. Maybe I'm doing accounting, I need a budget sheet. So maybe I'm practicing doing something and I have a budget sheet, and I just have to click and add that slide that is a budget sheet. Or in my case, we're going over something healthcare related, or we're going over something embalming related. Maybe I already have the mathematical formula filled out and I just need to fill in the numbers where I need to go. And that's going to help me follow along so that I don't have to put the parentheses in. I don't have to put the times or the addition or subtraction, because that part's already done and I can keep up with the lecture a lot easier. All right. So in this case, I'm going to start from scratch and I'm going to leave a slide here. Now, I want to change the size of my slide. So I'm going to click Design. And on the right side here, you see Slide Size. I'm going to click down. You do have different options. I'm going to click, if I click Page Setup, this gives me the ability to use some predetermined sizes, or I can make them custom. So let's say I want a letter, 8.5 by 11. That's going to give me a 10 by 7.5, and that's fine. Down here, I can determine the slides. Do I want them this direct, profile or lateral there. Do I want, same way? How do I want them for the notes, handouts, and outlines? So I'm going to select profile for both of these. All right, click. It's going to ask me if I want to scale up or scale down. So we're going to scale up. It doesn't really matter. It depends on what you want to do. For in this case, I'm going to scale up. You can see that all my other slides did change. So that does mess with the other slides I have. So you need to do this consistently for an entire presentation. But that's not really where I'm going with this. What I am doing is switching to this. So I'm going to take draw off for a second so I can use my mouse. And you'll notice that on the top of the screen where it has draw, this is going to allow you to click. It allows you to use a pen, or maybe I can highlight something. I could also have an eraser. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that up. And then in this case, you can see that there is a insert table. You can do this in the side, both a sideways or vertical view of the page. It depends on what you want to do. But in this case, I'm going to use 2 columns and we'll do 15 rows. How about that? Insert. And now I'm going to bring that all the way. Oops. I can bring that up, or I can do my entire page and adjust that. So in this case, it's fine. We'll leave that. So now what we're going to do is use our borders. We can go, nope, we can get rid of all the borders. We can use just the inside horizontal border. So that just goes sideways. I'm going to shade this entire area. We're going to put no fill in. And then for our border, we're going to need to color that as well. So I can go with that. And we can, okay, so we can determine what you want in this case. All right, so we're going to change that to black and fill in our, oops. So now in this case, we have horizontal lines that are going to provide us a page, and we're going to add in the vertical border as well. Now, again, you can do this however you want, whatever works for you. But in this case, I'm going to put my pen down for the moment and we will type. So we're going to need a page to go by, right? So let's pull up a excerpt of the embalming textbook. We're going to put that right there. And then before class, what we're going to do, we'll move that over temporarily, but what we're going to do is we're going to prepare for class. And we're going to read our textbook. And as we go, I'm going to put in the index. Oops. I can add in that we have high, medium, and low. Now, during lecture, and I can also add in, because I'm looking at that column over there, that our high is used as a co-injection, whereas our medium is any notes I want to put in are fine. Okay, so we're going to have however you want to do that. Okay, if you're reading up on high, we can say that this is for trauma. I can use this for delayed embalming, versus medium is your so-called normal case. Whatever you find from the textbook or whatever you find from your research prior to class while you're preparing to go to lecture. initial injection. And you can, maybe we're going to say does not close off capillaries too soon. So now we go to lecture. And again, we'll continue all these things, but now we're in lecture. Professor Shea's talking. And now you're going to add in all of these other items in there that you're going to need, right? Anything that is important to know. You know, we're going to write first gallon or half gallon. We're going to write that this would then increase index with each gallon to get desired effect. Okay, whatever's important to write. So that's how we're going to take our notes. Or again, I can write this out with my pen. So in that case, I can, I can write I can write on the space, whatever works for you. And if you have a write on tablet or if you want to type things in. So basically, this first column is done before lecture. And this is lecture. And that's where you take your notes for all of that. Now, I'm going to add another slide and I'm going to show you how can we take the same thing and we're going to make this 3 columns instead. So first I need to, because I have a colored background, you can see all you have to do is click solid fill and make sure that you have the right color. I had already done white for the prior one, so just make sure that it's the proper fill. And again, I have to go back to draw because I need to get rid of the pen temporarily here. I'm going to use the columns and I'm going to go with 3 columns, 3 columns, and then we'll go with 15 rows. 3 columns, 15 rows. And when we do that, same thing. We're going to insert we're going to get rid of the shading. We're going to go with our horizontal borders. And then in this case, I can add vertical borders too. Now, again, it gets a little tighter for space, but again, you can make this, you can zoom in, you can work on this, you can use a smaller text and then zoom, or you can use a larger page and shrink it down, however works for you. All right, so in this case, I'm going to draw, and then, so this first one is your textbook. This is your lecture. And then this area is to fill in. And what do I mean by fill in? I mean that during the text, you're filling in anything that is prior to the lecture, you're filling in from your textbook in this space here. Leave enough space for yourself to work. Then during lecture, you start adding things into here. This is where you take your notes and you're able to line everything up. Then your fill-in. For your fill-in, you can now say, oh, hold on, let me afterwards, I was writing quick lecture notes. I had, pre-written everything out. So anything you wrote from the textbook, you don't have to write in your lecture notes because you've already written it. The lecture is adding items that you didn't cover before. Now, fill in is filling in all of the details, and you don't have to fill every space. That's the key thing. So if you already have it in text, the professor talks about it, but nothing needs to be added, then don't add a lecture note for that column, or to that row. But anything as you go along, fill in those respective spaces afterwards. As you're later studying, you can add to those notes, make things afterwards where you say, oh, I need to look something up. Maybe you're going to find a picture and you can add a picture in. Maybe you didn't understand something, or maybe you missed something in the lecture and you're like, hold on, let me look back and let me make some sense of this. Or maybe you need to process it. And maybe in this thing, you can add in some tricks that allow you to understand it. Maybe acronyms that help you understand something, or maybe you wrote the acronym here, ABC, and then in this column you wrote what A means, B means, and C means. And that you had to do afterwards because you didn't have enough time to write it all out during lecture. And that's perfectly fine. But that is proper note taking. Now, I want to show you in Word. You can do the same thing in Word that you can do in PowerPoint. Again, you don't need to add columns. Adding columns like this just makes things more organized. I could also get rid of that, and I could make things just as easy. If I do my table design, go to my borders, I can remove the horizontal lines, and I could just handwrite. Now, what this did was I just gave myself columns to work with, kind of divided my page with some lines, and I'm now handwriting in. Nothing wrong with doing that as well. But again, PowerPoint's a very dynamic program, so you can work with PowerPoint very well. Now, again, here's Word, and I can do the same thing. I can draw, I can draw right on the page. If I want, I can draw my columns, can draw a straight line there. And then same thing, I can do my, my lecture notes. I can do my fill in, and I can do my textbook. So again, I could do something to that effect. The only thing with Word, and this is why I divert to PowerPoint, is that now you have to change pages. It gets a little harder because it's only going to give you one page at a time. If you're typing, then it's a little easier. So you can do the same thing. I can insert a table, and by inserting that table, then same thing, you can now type on it. You could write over it by creating yourself columns, whatever works for you. Again, the nice thing about PowerPoint is that you are able to move. I'm going to cover that up, but I can just keep adding slides if I want. And as I keep adding more slides, again, you might want to not have a colorful background like I started with, but it's easy enough to fix. So the nice thing is I could find an image. Let's say that's what I want. I'm going to put that image in, because all I had to do was Google it and add it in. Now, this is something you can do prior to the lecture as well. Start Googling pictures of maybe anatomical images, whatever works for you. Maybe I wanted to, add an X-ray. Easy enough to do. I go to the web, I copy, and I paste it. Now here's my X-ray. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw, and I'm going to see right there, see an arrow. I can change the size of my stylus to big to small. And since I'm writing on an X-ray, I need my stylus to be paperwhite. So now I come over here, and now I can draw right on that, and I can write that. Okay. And then I can maybe draw, maybe I'm trying to measure the heart, and I need to determine, is the heart in its proper size? And I can line up that this would be the nipple line. Let's say that's the nipple line. So is the heart its proper size, or do we have cardiomegaly? Maybe I need to measure. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. I'm counting the ribs going up. Is the diaphragm in the right direction? How are my apexes? What am I looking at? I'm looking at the airway. Or is there anything stuck in it? Right. So it depends. What's the lecture about, and what am I talking about in this lecture, and what do I need to outline? And how do I need to take notes? But you can see how easy it is for me to take notes on this X-ray using my stylus. And again, you can do the same thing on a notepad on a piece of paper. But The nice thing about preparing for lecture is you don't need to use the slides of the lecturer or your professor. You can Google your own images, put a diagram of the body in before you take your anatomy class, or if you know this is a lecture on raising arteries for embalming for my students, maybe you want to Google yourself an image online of a body with all of the arteries. And then on that, you can now label where all those arteries are. You can make notes of which ones are we most likely to raise, which ones are the minor ones. Maybe you leave yourself enough space next to it to make notes as to why would you raise the carotid artery, or why would I raise the femoral? What is the benefit to raising the right carotid versus the left carotid, or benefit of the right carotid over the femoral? So these are all notes that you would be taking in your side column, but the benefit is that you can pre-add the photo. You don't have to rely on just text and trying to understand it. Google an image, put that image right in, and you can do that mid-lecture too, now with computers. Google it, copy, paste if you know that's something you need, or again, prepare all of your slides, prepare your own lecture for different topics, and then as you need to do, all I do is I click between them and say, oh, hold on, let me put a note here. Oh, hold on, let me go here. And then maybe I leave a few blank slides. I don't have to keep adding them. I added some with columns, some with images, and then I just switch back and forth as we go. So again, note-taking is key to passing exams. Note-taking is fundamental, and note-taking gives you what you need to study. It cuts through the entire textbook. It gives you the ability to determine what is important, but more than anything, it gives you the ability to determine how you're going to remember it. Not just how the lecture went, not just how the textbook reads, because the textbook is paragraphs, but allows you to turn it into something you can understand. And the other thing with note-taking, and this will be mentioned in a subsequent mini lecture here, but the other thing to do is come up with ways of remembering things that maybe pertain things. I'm a camper, I'm a hiker, I love skiing. Maybe I can relate something to a prior job or experiences I have, right? Why do, what is this heart that, how do I remember that the heart has to be this wide and not wider or not thinner? Maybe I need to remember if the heart is reversed, in what cases, what does that mean, right? Whatever I'm trying to remember, maybe I can relate it to something. Or again, maybe I have an image of a trauma up and I'm trying to label, how am I going to fix this trauma? Then I'm going to remember it by certain methods, acronyms that make it up. It don't have to be the textbook ones, acronyms that I make up that make it easier, or other things. One thing my grandmother always taught me, and this is where I'm going with this, is how many feet are in a mile, right? That could be easier, that could be hard, depending. Maybe you committed it to memory. But the answer is 5,280. Now, my grandmother taught me that at a very young age. But how do I remember that still to this day? Well, 5 people went into the desert, 2 ate nothing, right? 5, 2, 8, 0. 5 people went into the desert, 2 ate nothing. 5,280. Still to this day, I remember this simply because of a memorization tool. But again, these are different things that I might write on my notes that maybe the professor used, or maybe I write it on my column, right? So now I wrote out the text, I have to remember all these things. In the lecture note, I remember it's 5,280. And then in that fill-in space in the middle, this is what I do after lecture. Don't just take the lecture, drop it, and then take the exam. Don't just study your lecture notes as is. Go back and fill in this space in the center and fill in things like that memorization tool. 5 people went in the desert, 2 ate nothing, and put that next to the area that it pertains to. That's why we use the 2 or 3 column method. I hope that this helped you. If there are other topics that will be of benefit to you, please reach out to me. It is my first initial last name at capecod.edu. Or you can email funeralservice@capecod.edu and you'll reach myself as well as my entire program's faculty and staff. I do hope this benefited you. There will be subsequent lectures on study techniques, on test taking, as well as other pertinent topics.